Hi, I'm Marcus. They told me the house was a gift for graduating law school, a reward for all my hard work. But when Grandpa asked about it at the family reunion, everything unraveled. The silence that followed his innocent question revealed a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. What happened next changed my life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The acceptance letter from Morrison and Associates arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, crisp and official in its cream-colored envelope. Senior Associate, Corporate Law Division. Starting salary made my student loan debt seem less crushing. I held the letter in my hands, reading it 3 times before reality sank in. After 7 grueling years of undergrad and law school, countless all-nighters, and a bar exam that nearly broke me, I had finally made it. I called my parents immediately, my hands still trembling with excitement as I dialed their number. The phone rang twice before my father. Robert answered with his usual gruff greeting. "Dad, I got it. The position at Morrison and Associates, Senior Associate." The words tumbled out of me in a rush of adrenaline and relief. There was a pause, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then his voice came through, measured and controlled as always. "That's good news, Marcus. Your mother will be pleased. Good news." After everything I'd sacrificed, every relationship I'd put on hold, every weekend I'd spent buried in case studies while my friends were out living their lives, and that was his response. Good news. I swallowed the disappointment, reminding myself that my father had never been one for emotional displays. "Is Mom there? I'd like to tell her myself." "She's at the grocery store. I'll have her call you back." The call ended with the same emotional distance that characterized most of our conversations. I set the phone down and stared out the window of my cramped studio apartment, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The acceptance letter sat on my kitchen table, a symbol of achievement that suddenly felt hollow without anyone to truly share it with. My mother, Linda called back that evening. Her voice carried more warmth than my father's, but there was something distracting about her tone, as if she was multitasking while we spoke. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful news about the job. We're so proud of you." The words were right, but they felt rehearsed, like lines from a script she'd memorized for these occasions. "Thanks, Mom. I was thinking maybe we could celebrate. Maybe dinner. This weekend, well, things are a bit hectic right now. Your brother is coming to visit next month, and we're trying to get everything ready for him." You know how Chad gets when the house isn't perfect? Chad. My older brother, the golden child, who'd managed to charm his way through life without ever really applying himself to anything. He'd dropped out of college twice, bounced between jobs, and somehow always landed on his feet, usually with our parents' financial assistance, cushioning his falls. Right, of course? I forced the disappointment out of my voice. Maybe another time then. Absolutely, sweetheart. We'll plan something soon. But soon it never came. The weeks passed and my achievement faded into the background noise of family obligations and Chad's latest crisis. He'd lost another job, something about a disagreement with his supervisor, needed help with rent. Again, I listened to my mother explain it over the phone, her voice full of concern for her eldest son while my law degree collected dust on my wall. Unacknowledged and uncelebrated. The apartment I'd been renting since law school was a constant reminder of my financial limitations. The carpet was stained. The heating barely worked in winter, and the neighbors upstairs seemed to practice tap dancing at 2 in the morning. Every month, I watched half my paycheck disappear into rent for a place that felt more like a waiting room than a home. I'd been looking at houses for months, scrolling through real estate listings during my lunch breaks, imagining what it would be like to have a place of my own. Garage where I could actually park my car instead of leaving it exposed to the elements. A kitchen with more than 2 feet of counter space. A bedroom that didn't double as my office, dining room, and living room. The house on Maple Street caught my attention immediately. It was a modest 2-story colonial, with blue shutters and a small front porch, surrounded by mature oak trees that would provide shade in the summer. The listing photos showed hardwood floors, updated appliances, and a backyard perfect for the dog I'd always wanted but couldn't have in my current apartment. The price was just within my reach if I stretched my budget and put down every penny I'd saved. I drove by the house 3 times before I worked up the courage to call the realtor. The neighborhood was quiet and tree-lined, the kind of place where people actually talked to their neighbors and kids rode bikes in the street. It felt like the American dream I'd been working toward my entire adult life. The showing was on a Saturday morning in late April. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Patterson, met me at the front door with a bright smile and a folder full of paperwork. As we walked through the rooms, I could picture myself living there. Morning coffee on the front porch, dinner parties in the spacious dining room, quiet evenings reading in the study with built-in bookshelves. The sellers are motivated, Mrs. Patterson explained, as we stood in the master bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows. They've already moved out of state for a job opportunity. If you're interested, I'd recommend making an offer soon. I spent the rest of the weekend running numbers, calculating mortgage payments, insurance costs, and property taxes. It would be tight, but manageable. On Monday morning, I called Mrs. Patterson and made an offer. 3 days later, she called back with good news. The sellers had accepted. The next few weeks passed in a blur of inspections, appraisals, and paperwork. I felt like I was living in a dream, finally taking control of my life in a way that felt substantial and permanent. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a statement. I was establishing roots, creating a foundation for the future I'd been working toward. My parents seemed pleased when I told them about the house, though their enthusiasm felt muted compared to mine. My father asked practical questions about the mortgage rate and property taxes, while my mother worried about the neighborhood and whether I'd taken on too much responsibility. Their concerns felt familiar, the same cautious pessimism that had accompanied every major decision I'd made since college. "Are you sure you can afford it, honey?" my mother asked during one of our phone conversations. "Houses are such a big commitment. What if something goes wrong with your job?" "I've run all the numbers, Mom. I can handle it. Besides, it's an investment in my future. I just worry about you taking on so much debt. Maybe you should wait a little longer, save up more money." But I was tired of waiting, tired of living in limbo, tired of putting my life on hold while I waited for the perfect moment that never seemed to come. The house represented everything I'd been working for. A tangible reward for years of sacrifice and dedication. The closing was scheduled for a Friday in early June. I took the afternoon off work, dressed in my best suit, and met the sellers and their attorney at the title company. The conference room smelled like old coffee and copy toner, and the table was covered with stacks of documents that required my signature. As I signed page after page, initialing clauses about escrow accounts and title insurance, I felt a growing sense of accomplishment. This was it. After years of uncertainty and struggle, I was finally becoming a homeowner. The American dream was within my grasp. Purchased with my own hard work and determination, the keys felt heavier than I'd expected when the seller placed them in my palm. Mrs. Patterson shook my hand and congratulated me on becoming a homeowner, her smile genuine and warm. As I walked out of the title company, the deed safely tucked in my briefcase, I felt like I could conquer the world. I drove straight to the house, parking in the driveway that was now officially mine. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, making the blue shutters seem to glow. I walked up the front steps, my footsteps echoing on the wooden porch, and slid the key into the lock. The door opened with a satisfying click, and I stepped inside. The house was empty now, my footsteps echoing off the hardwood floors. But it wasn't hollow. It was full of potential, full of the life I was going to build within these walls. I walked from room to room, running my hands along the banisters and door frames, claiming every square inch as my own. That night, I called my parents to share the news. I'd officially closed on the house, and the keys were in my possession. My father congratulated me with his usual reserved approval, while my mother expressed a mixture of pride and concern that felt typical of our relationship. "We're very proud of you, Marcus," she said, and for once her words felt genuine rather than obligatory. "You've worked so hard for this." Standing in my empty house, phone pressed to my ear, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Maybe this would be the thing that finally earned their unqualified support. Maybe homeownership would prove to them that I'd truly made it, that all my sacrifices had been worth something. The moving truck arrived the following Saturday, and I spent the weekend unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. Each item I placed felt like an act of claiming space, of declaring my independence and success. The diploma went on the wall in the study, right next to the window where the morning light would illuminate it. The law books filled the built-in shelves, creating a proper library that made me feel like a real attorney rather than just someone pretending to be one. By Sunday evening, the house was starting to feel like home. I ordered pizza and ate it on the front porch, watching my new neighbors tend their gardens and walk their dogs. A couple across the street waved, and I waved back, feeling like I belonged in this quiet suburban paradise I'd created for myself. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest I could remember. I developed routines around my new home: morning coffee on the porch before work, evening walks around the neighborhood, weekend trips to the hardware store to tackle small improvement projects. I felt grounded in a way I'd never experienced before, anchored by the weight of ownership and responsibility. My parents visited once, shortly after I'd moved in. They walked through the rooms with polite interest, my father checking the windows and electrical outlets with the critical eye of someone who'd spent years in construction before moving into management. My mother admired the kitchen and asked questions about the neighborhood, but there was something distant about their engagement, as if they were visiting a hotel rather than their son's first home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's very nice, Marcus, my mother said as they prepared to leave. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. But even as she spoke the words, I sensed something unspoken lingering beneath the surface. A tension I couldn't quite identify, a hesitation that made me wonder if they were holding something back. I dismissed the feeling as my own insecurity, my lifelong struggle to earn their unqualified approval. Summer melted into early fall, and I settled deeper into my new life. The job at Morrison & Associates was challenging but rewarding, and I was beginning to feel like I'd found my professional footing. The house became my sanctuary, a place where I could decompress from the pressures of work and enjoy the fruits of my labor. It was during one of these peaceful September evenings, sitting on my porch with a beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, that my mother called with news about the annual family reunion. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was grilling chicken on my new back deck, enjoying the crisp October air and the satisfaction of cooking on my own property. My mother's voice carried an unusual excitement that immediately caught my attention. "Marcus, honey, I have wonderful news. We're hosting the family reunion this year at Grandpa Theodore's lake house. It's been 3 years since we've all been together, and he's so excited to see everyone." I smiled, flipping the chicken and watching the flames dance beneath the grill grates. Grandpa Theodore was my father's father, a man in his early 80s who still possessed the sharp wit and gentle humor that had made him my favorite family member throughout my childhood. Unlike my parents, he'd always shown genuine interest in my achievements, asking detailed questions about my studies and celebrating my successes with authentic enthusiasm. "That sounds great, Mom. When is it?" "The weekend of November 15th. Everyone's going to be there. Your Uncle David is flying in from California with his family, and even Cousin Jennifer is coming down from Boston. Chad's bringing his new girlfriend, Sarah. It's going to be such a lovely time." The mention of Chad and his latest girlfriend stirred a familiar mixture of emotions. My brother had a pattern of introducing new romantic interests at family gatherings, each one treated like a potential daughter-in-law by our parents before inevitably disappearing from his life within a few months. Meanwhile, my own relationships had rarely warranted mention at family events. "I'll be there," I assured her, already looking forward to spending time with my grandfather and showing him photos of my new house. Grandpa Theodore had always been interested in real estate, having built a small fortune through careful property investments throughout his life. I knew he'd appreciate the details of my home purchase and the financial planning that had made it possible. "Oh, and Marcus," my mother continued, her voice taking on a tone I couldn't quite interpret. "You should bring some photos of your new place. Everyone's curious to see what you've done with it." Something about the way she said it felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Maybe it was the slight hesitation in her voice, or the way she seemed to emphasize certain words. I dismissed the feeling as overthinking and promised to bring plenty of pictures to share. The weeks leading up to the reunion passed quickly. Filled with work deadlines and home improvement projects, I'd started painting the guest bedroom, hoping to have it finished in case any out-of-town relatives wanted to stay over during future visits. The sense of pride I felt while rolling paint onto walls I owned was unlike anything I'd experienced as a renter. Every improvement I made increased both the value and the personal satisfaction of my investment. I printed out dozens of photos of the house, both interior and exterior shots that showcased the property in its best light. The autumn leaves created a beautiful backdrop for the outdoor pictures. I'd managed to capture the cozy warmth of the interior spaces with careful attention to lighting and angles. Looking through the photos, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere ownership. This house represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed to achieve. My colleague James, fellow associate at Morrison & Associates, stopped by my office the Friday before the reunion. We'd become friends over the past few months, bonding over our shared experience of navigating the demanding world of corporate law as relatively new attorneys. "So you're heading to the big family gathering this weekend?" "Want to have a weekend?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "How are you feeling about it?" "Actually pretty excited," I replied, organizing the house photos into a neat stack. "It's been a while since I've seen my grandfather, and I want to show him what I've accomplished. He's always been supportive of my goals." James nodded, but I caught a flicker of something in his expression. "That's great, man. Family support makes all the difference." There was something in his tone that made me look up from the photos. James had shared stories about his own complicated family dynamics, particularly his parents' tendency to minimize his achievements while celebrating his siblings' lesser accomplishments. "What is it?" I asked. He shrugged, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Nothing specific. It's just that family reunions can be ... revealing. Sometimes we learn things about people we thought we knew." His words stuck with me as I drove toward the lake house that Saturday morning. The 2-hour drive through, changing fall foliage, should have been relaxing, but I found myself replaying James's comment and wondering what he'd meant. My family had their quirks and dynamics, but I couldn't imagine what revelations a simple reunion might bring. Grandpa. Theodore's lake house sat on a pristine stretch of water, surrounded by towering pine trees and scattered oaks, still clinging to their autumn colors. The property had been in our family for over 40 years. A retreat where my father and his siblings had spent summers as children. I'd always loved coming here, finding peace in the gentle lapping of water against the dock and the smell of pine needles and wood. Smoked-out cars were already parked in the circular driveway when I arrived, and I could hear voices and laughter coming from the back deck that overlooked the lake. I grabbed my overnight bag and the folder of house photos, taking a moment to appreciate the familiar sight of the rustic cedar-sided house with its green metal roof and wraparound porch. Uncle David met me at the front door, his California tan making him look younger than his 55 years. "Marcus, look at you, looking all professional and successful. I heard you bought a house. That's fantastic, kid." His genuine enthusiasm felt good, a stark contrast to the measured responses I'd grown accustomed to from my parents. Had always been the family member who celebrated achievements loudly and without reservation. Perhaps because his own success in the tech industry had come after years of struggle and near failures. "Thanks, Uncle David. I brought some photos to show everyone. Your grandfather's been talking about your house purchase for weeks. He's so proud of you." The warmth in his voice was exactly what I needed to hear. Walked through the familiar hallways lined with family photos and lake memorabilia, I felt my earlier concerns melting away. This was going to be a good weekend, a chance to share my success with people who truly cared about my happiness. The back deck was crowded with family members I hadn't seen in years. Cousin Jennifer had cut her hair short and looked stylish in a way that suggested her Boston marketing career was going well. My Aunt Patricia was setting up an elaborate spread of appetizers while simultaneously managing her twin teenage sons, who seemed more interested in their phones than family conversation. Chad stood near the railing with a petite blonde woman who must have been Sarah, his arm around her waist in a possessive gesture I recognized from previous relationships. Marcus. Grandpa Theodore's voice boomed across the deck, and I turned. To see him rising from a deck chair with the careful movements of someone managing arthritic joints, but determined not to let age slow him down. His eyes, still sharp and bright behind wire-rimmed glasses, lit up when he saw me. "Grandpa, you look great," I said, accepting his firm handshake and noting that his grip was still strong, despite his 83 years. "I feel great, especially now that my successful grandson is here. I've been bragging about you to everyone who will listen. Senior associate at a prestigious law firm and a homeowner at 28. You're setting the bar pretty high for your generation." His words filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. This was the recognition I'd been craving, the acknowledgement that my hard work and sacrifices had been worthwhile. I pulled out the folder of house photos, eager to share the visual proof of my achievement. I brought pictures of the house. Just thought you might want to see what I ended up buying. Absolutely. Let's sit down and go through them properly. We settled into adjacent deck chairs, and I began spreading the photos out on the small table between us. Grandpa Theodore examined each picture with the attention of someone who truly understood real estate, asking detailed questions about square footage, lot size, and neighborhood demographics. "This is beautiful work, Marcus. The bones of the house are solid, and you can see the care that went into the original construction. What did you end up paying for it, if you don't mind me asking?" I told him the purchase price, and he nodded. Approvingly, "That's a good value for this market. You did your homework." Our conversation attracted other family members, and soon I was surrounded by relatives examining the photos and asking questions about my home buying experience. The attention felt wonderful, validating in a way that made me understand why Chad always sought the spotlight at these gatherings. For once, I was the center of positive attention, the family success story worth celebrating. "The kitchen is gorgeous," Cousin Jennifer said, holding up a photo of the updated appliances and granite countertops. "I'm so jealous. My Boston apartment kitchen is basically a closet with a hot plate. You should come visit sometime," I offered. "The guest room is almost finished." "I'd love that. It's been too long since we've had a chance to really catch up." The afternoon passed pleasantly, filled with the comfortable rhythms of family conversation and shared meals. Chad regaled everyone with stories from his latest job in digital marketing, though I noticed he was vague about specific details and responsibilities. Sarah seemed sweet enough, though she had the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone meeting an entire extended family for the first time. As evening approached, my parents finally arrived, apologizing for their late arrival. Due to traffic delays, my mother looked tired, and my father seemed more reserved than usual, offering polite greetings to relatives but lacking his typical jovial demeanor during family gatherings. "Marcus, sweetheart, how was the drive up?" my mother asked, giving me a brief hug that felt perfunctory rather than warm. "Fine, Mom. I've been showing everyone the house photos. Grandpa loves the property." Something flickered across her face, too quick for me to interpret before it was replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm sure he does." My father shook hands with his siblings and father, but I noticed he seemed to avoid extended conversations, particularly with Grandpa Theodore. When dinner was called, he positioned himself at the opposite end of the long table from his father, engaging primarily with Chad and Sarah about topics that didn't require deep family connections. The evening meal was a typical family affair, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, and the comfortable chaos that comes from having 3 generations gathered around one table. I found myself seated between Jennifer and Uncle David, both of whom continued to express enthusiasm about my house purchase and career progress. "You know, Marcus," Uncle David said between bites of my aunt's famous lasagna, "your success reminds me of your grandfather at your age. He had that same drive to build something lasting, to create security through hard work and smart decisions." Grandpa Theodore smiled at the compliment. "Marcus has always reminded me of myself when I was starting out. Understands the value of delayed gratification and long-term planning. I felt a glow of pride at the comparison. Grandpa Theodore's business acumen was legendary in our family, and being compared to him felt like the highest possible compliment. Across the table, I noticed my parents exchanging a look I couldn't interpret. But the moment passed quickly as conversation moved to other topics. After dinner, we moved to the living room for dessert and coffee. The fireplace crackled with split oak logs, casting dancing shadows on the knotty pine walls, decorated with decades of family photos and lake house memorabilia. This was always my favorite part of family gatherings, the relaxed conversation and shared stories that reminded me why these connections mattered despite all the complications. Grandpa Theodore settled into his favorite leather recliner, coffee cup balanced on the armrest, and surveyed the room with obvious satisfaction. It's so good to have everyone together again. We should do this more often. Definitely, I agreed, thinking about how I could potentially host the next gathering at my new house once. I had the guest room finished and maybe added some outdoor furniture to the back deck. As if reading my thoughts, Grandpa Theodore turned to me with renewed interest. "Marcus, I've been thinking about your house all afternoon. I'd love to see it in person sometime. Maybe I could drive down for a visit in the spring when the weather's nicer." "I'd love that, Grandpa. Could stay in the guest room once I get it set up properly." His eyes twinkled with what looked like amusement, though I wasn't sure what he found funny about my offer. "Oh, I don't think that would be necessary. I probably won't need to stay overnight." Before I could ask what he meant, my mother stood up abruptly, her coffee cup rattling against its saucer. "I think I'll help Patricia with the dishes," she announced. Though my aunt hadn't asked for assistance and was already loading the dishwasher efficiently, my father watched her leave the room, then cleared his throat and changed the subject to college football, a topic that successfully distracted most of the male family members for the next hour. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something I'd missed entirely. The evening wound down with promises to stay in better touch and tentative plans for future gatherings. As family members began saying their goodbyes and heading to their respective bedrooms, I found myself alone on the deck with Grandpa Theodore, both of us enjoying the peaceful sounds of water lapping against the dock and the distant call of a loon. "This has been perfect. Grandpa, thank you for organizing everything." He patted my shoulder with affection. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, son. Family is the most important thing we have, even when it's complicated." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely, but his expression was thoughtful rather than troubled. We sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes before he stood and stretched, his joints creaking audibly in the cool night air. "I think I'll head to bed. Tomorrow's going to be another full day." As I watched him walk into the house, moving more slowly than I remembered from previous visits, I felt a surge of affection mixed with the sobering realization that these gatherings wouldn't continue forever. Grandpa Theodore was still sharp and engaged, but he was also 83 years old, and every family reunion could potentially be the last time we were all together. I stayed on the deck for another hour, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the weekend's conversations. Despite my parents' somewhat distant behavior, the reunion had been everything I'd hoped for. My grandfather's pride in my achievements felt genuine and meaningful, and I'd enjoyed reconnecting with extended family members who seemed to truly appreciate my success. Tomorrow would bring more family time, probably a big breakfast, and maybe some lakeside activities if the weather held. I was looking forward to more conversations about my house and career, more opportunities to share my excitement about the life I was building. For once, I felt like the family's success story, the responsible one, whose choices were worthy of celebration. Rather than concern, if only I had known that tomorrow would shatter that feeling completely, revealing truths that would change my understanding of everything I thought I'd accomplished through my own hard work and determination. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November clarity that made the lake look like polished glass. I woke early, stepping onto the deck with my coffee to watch the mist rise from the water as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the pine trees. The peaceful scene felt like a perfect end to what had been a wonderful family weekend. Inside, the kitchen was already bustling with activity. Aunt Patricia had taken charge of breakfast preparations, directing a small army of family members in the creation of what would undoubtedly be a feast. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the sound of easy conversation and occasional laughter. "Marcus, perfect timing," Uncle David called out as I entered. "We need someone tall to reach the good serving platters on the top shelf." I helped retrieve dishes and set the long dining table, enjoying the comfortable domesticity of the morning routine. Chad and Sarah had emerged, looking slightly hungover from whatever late-night activities they'd engaged in after I'd gone to bed. But they were making an effort to be helpful and social. Grandpa Theodore appeared in the kitchen doorway. He's already dressed in slacks and a crisp button-down shirt despite the early hour. His morning routine had clearly remained unchanged over the decades, and I admired his commitment to starting each day with purpose and dignity. "Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful day we have ahead of us." "Morning, Grandpa," I said, giving him a quick hug. "Sleep well, like a baby. There's something about the lake air that just knocks me out." He poured himself coffee from the pot that had been brewing since dawn. I was thinking we might take a walk down to the dock after breakfast. "I'd love to hear more about your plans for the house." Invitation filled me with warmth. His one-on-one conversations with my grandfather had always been precious to me. Moments when I felt truly seen and understood by someone whose opinion mattered deeply. Breakfast was served family style, with platters of eggs, bacon, sausage, and fresh biscuits passed around the table amid cheerful chatter about the previous evening and plans for the day, making this meal feel both celebratory and slightly melancholy. "So Marcus's cousin Jennifer said, buttering a biscuit, 'When do you think you'll have the guest room finished?' I'm already planning my visit. It's probably by Christmas if I keep up the current pace. I'm doing most of the work myself, so it's taking longer than it would with contractors, but I'm enjoying the process. It's the way to do it." Uncle David nodded approvingly. Sweat equity is the best kind of investment. You learn every inch of your property that way. Grandpa Theodore smiled at this exchange, but I noticed he seemed to be studying my parents, who were seated at the far end of the table and engaging in quiet conversation with Chad and Sarah. My mother kept glancing in our direction with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what?" Grandpa Theodore said suddenly, his voice carrying across the breakfast conversations. "I just realized something. Marcus, I never asked you yesterday. Did you like the new house? Are you happy with how everything turned out?" The question seemed innocent enough, but the moment he asked it, something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but they became more subdued, and I had the distinct feeling that people were listening to my response with unusual attention. "I love it, Grandpa. It's everything I hoped for and more. I feel like I finally have a real home." "It's wonderful to hear," he said, his eyes twinkling with what I was beginning to recognize as something more than simple grandfatherly pride. "And the financing worked out smoothly? No problems with the mortgage approval process?" Now, I was certain something was happening that I didn't understand. The question was odd, more detailed than his usual inquiries, and I noticed my parents had gone completely still at the other end of the table. My father's coffee cup was frozen halfway to his lips, and my mother was staring down at her plate, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "Actually, it was surprisingly smooth," I replied, feeling increasingly confused by the tension that seemed to be building around this innocent conversation. I was worried about getting approved for the full amount, but everything went through without any issues. Grandpa Theodore nodded slowly, and now his expression was definitely amused, though there was an edge to it that I'd never seen before. "That is interesting. Very interesting indeed." The silence that followed felt heavy and expectant. Looked confused, glancing between our grandfather and our parents with the expression of someone who sensed drama but couldn't identify its source. Sarah seemed to shrink into her chair, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension. "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking around the table at faces that had gone from relaxed, cheerful, to guarded and anxious in the space of a few minutes. "Everything's fine, Marcus," Grandpa Theodore said, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard from him before. It was still warm, but there was steel underneath it now. "I'm just curious about something. Robert, Linda, would you like to tell Marcus about the phone call you made to me in May?" My parents went pale, actually pale. like the blood had drained from their faces in an instant. My father set down his coffee cup with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and my mother's breath seemed to catch in her throat. "Dad, this isn't the time," my father said quietly, but his voice carried a note of pleading that I'd never heard before. "I think this is exactly the time, Grandpa," Theodore replied, his gaze steady and uncompromising. "Marcus deserves to know the truth about his house." The words hit me like a physical blow. My house. What truth about my house? I looked around the table, seeing expressions ranging from confusion to obvious discomfort. But no one was meeting my eyes except my grandfather. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "Marcus," Grandpa Theodore said gently, "your parents called me in May, right around the time you were looking at houses. They told me you'd found a property you wanted to buy, but that you'd been rejected for the mortgage because your income wasn't sufficient for the loan amount." The world seemed to tilt around me. That's not ... That's not what happened. It was approved. I got the mortgage myself. They asked me to co-sign the loan, he continued, his voice remaining calm and factual. They said you were too proud to ask for help yourself, that you'd be embarrassed if you knew they'd reached out to me. They asked me to keep it secret so you could feel like you'd accomplished this on your own. I felt like I was falling, like the solid ground beneath me had simply disappeared. The breakfast sounds around me became muffled and distant as the implications of his words sank in. You co-signed my mortgage?" "I did more than that, son. When they told me how much you needed for the down payment, I transferred $50,000 to your parents to pass along to you. They said you'd applied for a personal loan to cover the gap, but that the interest rate was going to be crushing. $1,000. The room spun around me as I tried to process this information. I had applied for a personal loan to help with the down payment, but it had been rejected. Then, 2 days later, my father had called to tell me about an unexpected bonus from his job that he wanted to share with me. A gift to help his son achieve the American dream. "The bonus," I whispered, looking at my father's stricken face. "Your work bonus that you gave me. That was Grandpa's money," my mother said quietly, her voice barely audible. We didn't want you to feel like you couldn't do it on your own." The betrayal hit me in waves. First, the shock of learning that my mortgage had been co-signed without my knowledge, that my financial independence was an illusion then. The realization that the down payment hadn't come from my savings and my father's generosity, but from my grandfather's wallet. And finally, the crushing understanding that everything I'd been celebrating, everything I'd been proud of, was built on a foundation of lies. "How long?" I asked, my voice hoarse.
"How long were you planning to keep this from me?"
My parents exchanged a look that spoke of years of practiced deception. "You thought maybe after you got established in your career," my mother said weakly, "when you were more financially secure." More financially secure. The laugh that escaped me was bitter and hollow. "I'm not financially secure at all, am I? I'm living in a house I couldn't afford, making payments on a mortgage I shouldn't have qualified for, all because you lied to me." "We were trying to help," my father said, finally finding his voice. "You worked so hard, Marcus. You deserved to have that house, but I didn't earn it." The words exploded out of me, causing several family members to flinch. I didn't accomplish anything. I'm just a 28-year-old man living in his grandfather's charity case disguised as his own success. Grandpa Theodore leaned forward, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Marcus, that's not entirely true. You did earn your law degree. You did get the job at Morrison & Associates. And you have been making every mortgage payment on time for 5 months. The help was just to get you started, but I didn't know about it." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Don't you understand? The whole point was proving I could do it myself. The pride, the accomplishment, the feeling that I'd finally made it, all of that was based on a lie." Chad, who had been silent throughout this revelation, finally spoke up. "Marcus, man, calm down. So you had some help. Big deal. We all need help sometimes." I turned to look at my brother, seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time, who had never been expected to stand on his own. would receive financial assistance from our parents without shame or secrecy. Chad, whose failures were cushioned and whose modest successes were celebrated, while my achievements had to be propped up with hidden support to be worthy of recognition.
Ow, you don't get it.
I said to him, "You've never had to prove yourself. You've never had to earn their approval or support. It's always just been given to you freely." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We're proud of both of you. Are you?" I asked, turning back to face her. "Because it seems like you're so convinced of my incompetence that you arranged financial assistance behind my back and then lied about it for months." The silence that followed was deafening. Round the table, family members sat frozen, their breakfast growing cold as they witnessed the destruction of everything I'd thought I knew about my life. Uncle David finally spoke, his voice careful and diplomatic. "Marcus, I can understand why you're upset, but maybe we should all take a step back here." "No," I said firmly. "I'm done taking steps back. I'm done being managed and handled and lied to for my own good." I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "Did any of you know about this?" The uncomfortable shuffling and averted gazes told me everything I needed to know. Jennifer cleared her throat. "We knew your parents had helped with the house somehow, but we didn't know the details. So everyone knew except me. Everyone was in on the secret of how pitiful Marcus needed his family's charity to achieve his dreams." "It wasn't charity," Grandpa Theodore said firmly. "It was an investment in your future. For what it's worth, I'm not sorry I did it." I looked at him, this man I'd idolized, this grandfather whose approval had meant everything to me. "You knew how important it was for me to do this myself. You knew what it meant to me." I did. And I wrestled with the decision for days before I agreed to help. "But Marcus, I've watched you struggle and sacrifice for years, putting your entire life on hold to achieve financial independence. When your parents told me you were so close to reaching your goal, but just needed a little boost to get there, I couldn't stand by and watch you fail for lack of a cosigner. But I should have failed," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "If I couldn't qualify for the mortgage on my own, if I couldn't save enough for the down payment, then I wasn't ready to buy a house. That's how the system is supposed to work. The system isn't always fair, son. Sometimes good people need help, and there's no shame in accepting it. There is when you don't know you're accepting it." I grabbed the folder of house photos from the sideboard where I'd left them the night before. "Do you know what these represent to me? They're proof that I made it, that all my sacrifices meant something. But they're actually just pictures of my grandfather's investment property that I happen to live in." I started tearing the photos in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like autumn leaves. Each torn image felt like shedding another layer of the illusion I'd been living in. "Marcus, stop," my mother pleaded, reaching toward me. "Why, they're not really mine anyway, are they? The house isn't mine. The accomplishment isn't mine. Even the pride I felt showing them to you yesterday wasn't really mine." Grandpa Theodore stood up slowly, his age showing more than it had all weekend. "Marcus, I understand you're hurt and angry, but that house is yours. Your name is on the deed. You make the payments. You're building equity. The help you received doesn't diminish that. It diminishes everything," I said quietly, the fight going out of me as the full weight of the situation settled on my shoulders. "Every time I walk into that house, every time I pay the mortgage, every time I feel proud of what I've accomplished, I'll know the truth. I'll know that I'm living a lie." I looked around the table one more time, seeing my family through new eyes. My parents, who had meant well, but had robbed me of the authentic achievement I'd been working toward. Chad, who had never been burdened with the expectation of complete independence. My extended family, who had known about my situation and chosen to maintain the fiction rather than tell me the truth. "I need to go," I announced, though I wasn't sure where I was planning to go or what I was going to do when I got there. "Marcus, please," my father said, standing up. "Let's talk about this. We can figure something out." "Figure out what?" "How to undo months of lies. How can you give me back the sense of accomplishment you took from me?" I shook my head. "The dares. Nothing to figure out. You've made your choices, and now I have to make mine." I walked toward the door, stepping over the torn pieces of house photos that littered the floor. Behind me, I could hear voices raised in urgent conversation, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't face any more revelations or explanations or attempts. To minimize the impact of what had happened, as I reached my car, I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. I turned to see Grandpa Theodore approaching, moving more quickly than I'd seen him move all weekend. "Marcus, wait." I stopped, my hand on the car door handle, and looked at this man who had been my hero and was now the architect of my deepest humiliation. "I know you're hurt," he said, slightly out of breath from his hurried walk, "and I know you feel betrayed. But I need you to understand something." "What's that?" "Everything you've accomplished in your life, your grades, your law degree, your Job, the way you've conducted yourself as a man, none of that was bought or borrowed or given to you. That was all you, Marcus. The house was just a house." "It wasn't just a house to me," I replied. "It was proof that I'd made it, that all my sacrifices had been worth something. They were. The house didn't make you successful, son. You were successful long before you bought it." I wanted to believe him, wanted to find some way to salvage meaning from the wreckage of the morning. But the truth was too fresh, too raw, too complete in its destruction of everything I'd thought I knew about myself. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but I'll never know for sure now, will I? I'll never know if I could have done it on my own because you didn't let me try." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd known him, my grandfather looked truly old. "You're right, and I'm sorry for that. I thought I was helping, but I can see now that I robbed you of something more valuable than any house." I got into my car and started the engine, looking back at the lake house that had always represented family and belonging and unconditional love. It still looked the same, but everything it meant to me had changed. As I drove away, I could see my grandfather standing in the driveway watching me go, his shoulders bent with something that might have been regret. The drive home gave me 2 hours to think, to process, to begin understanding the scope of what I'd learned. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my house, my grandfather's house, my mind corrected automatically. I had made several decisions. I called my bank first, asking about the process for removing a cosigner from a mortgage. The customer service representative explained that it would require either refinancing the loan in my name alone or paying off the mortgage entirely. Both options would require demonstrating sufficient income and assets to qualify for the full loan amount. Independently, next I called a real estate agent to get a current market valuation of the property. If I couldn't afford to keep the house on my own, I needed to know what my options were for selling it and paying back the money that had been invested in my supposed independence. The hardest call was to my workplace. I spoke with the managing partner about taking some personal time to deal with a family situation. My work had always been exemplary, and they granted me a week of leave without question. Over the following days, I threw myself into research and planning. I calculated exactly how much money I would need to refinance the mortgage without a cosigner, how much I would need to pay back the $50,000 down payment gift, and what my monthly expenses would look like if I managed to achieve true financial independence. The numbers were sobering. Even with my salary, I was approximately 18 months away from having sufficient assets and income history to qualify for the mortgage on my own. The down payment money would take even longer to repay if I wanted to maintain my current standard of living. But for the first time since the revelation at the lake house, I felt something approaching peace. I had a plan, a path toward authenticity that would require sacrifice and patience, but would ultimately give me what I'd been seeking all along. The knowledge that my achievements were genuinely my own. I called Grandpa Theodore on Wednesday evening, a conversation I'd been dreading but knew was necessary. "Marcus," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Grandpa. I wanted to talk to you about the house situation. Of course. Whatever you need." I took a deep breath. "I'm going to pay you back. All of it. The down payment money and any financial responsibility for the mortgage. It's going to take me some time, but I'm going to do it." There was a long pause. "Marcus, that's not necessary. I don't want the money back, I know. But I need to give it back. I need to know that I can stand on my own, that my accomplishments are real. You understand that, don't you? Another pause, longer this time, I do understand. And I'm proud of you for wanting to do this, even though I think you're being harder on yourself than necessary. Maybe, but it's important to me. Then we'll work something out. Whatever timeline you need, whatever terms make sense for you, I just want you to know that my offer to help came from love, not from any belief that you couldn't succeed on your own. I know that now, and I love you too, Grandpa. That's why this matters so much to me. The conversation ended with promises to stay in touch and work out the details of repayment in the coming weeks. I hung up feeling lighter than I had since Sunday morning, as if I'd taken the first real step toward reclaiming my sense of self. My parents called several times, but I wasn't ready for those conversations yet. The hurt was still too fresh, the sense of betrayal too complete. Maybe someday I would be able to understand their motivations and forgive their methods. But that day was still in the future. I spent the rest of the week planning and calculating, researching second jobs and side income opportunities that could accelerate my timeline for financial independence. It would mean more sacrifice, more delayed gratification, more nights and weekends devoted to work instead of leisure. But this time, the sacrifice would be authentic. It's chosen rather than unknowingly subsidized. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the revelation that had changed everything, I sat on the porch of my house with my coffee and watched the sun rise over my neighborhood. The house looked the same, felt the same, but my relationship to it had been fundamentally altered. This wasn't my dream home anymore. It was a reminder of lessons learned and goals adjusted. It was temporary shelter while I worked toward something more meaningful than mere ownership. The unshakable knowledge that whatever I achieved going forward would be entirely, authentically mine. The path ahead would be longer and harder than I'd originally planned, but for the first time in my adult life, I was completely certain that when I reached my destination, the victory would be real, earned through my own efforts, and free from the shadow of undisclosed assistance. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from what looks like success and work toward what actually feels like achievement. I was finally ready to start that work, no matter how long it took or how much it cost me along the way. The morning air was crisp with the promise of winter. I could hear my neighbors beginning to stir in the houses around me. Soon I would go inside, review my financial plans once more, and begin the process of turning my humiliation into motivation. But for now, I sat with my coffee and watched the world wake up, grateful for the painful clarity that had shown me the difference between appearing successful and actually earning success. It was a lesson worth every dollar I would spend to learn it properly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.